Hi, I'm Marcus. Welcome back to the historic series topic of famous battle in ancient China. Today, we will talk about how Qing state recovered from the defeat of Battle of Handan and prepared themselves ready for unification. In the last session, we mentioned that Baiji's post-Changbin campaign was disrupted by Fan Sui for his own interest. Yet, by the second year, when the king Qingzhao Xiangwang was regretted, he sent general named Wang Ling to attack the capital of Zhao, Handan, as Baiji was sick, or pretended to be sick. While since the force of Zhao fully prepared for the incoming invasion of Qing with vengeance and fury, the force of Qing suffered heavy casualty without taking the city. The seesaw battle lasted to the next year until the allies of Zhao sent the reinforcement. Eventually, the allied force drove Qing's force back from where they came, and even took Qing's Hedong prefecture and Shandong area. The king of Qing was both shameful and furious, and vented his anger on Baiji, thus had him suicidal. The defeat of Handan for Qing was a strategic mistake which could be thoroughly avoided, as it lost nearly 450,000 to 500,000 men in the Battle of Changbin and Handan. The state of Qing desperately needed to rehabilitate. We will discuss this session from 5 aspects. First, kingship plays a significant role in ancient hierarchical society. A stable crown may ensure less chaos and more prosperity. Second, what is the primary potential capability for a country to wage a war in ancient times? The answer is population and grain reserve. Besides, the exterior environment will definitely impact a country's military and diplomatic policy in short term and in the long run. Eventually, the prosperity of a nation essentially relies on its talent management. Now, let's begin with the first part, the succession of the crown. Approximately 30 years before the unification of First Emperor Qin Shi Huang, in 251 BC, after his 56 years of vigorous ruling, the king of Qingzhao Xiangwang left his heir a state urgently needed to rehabilitate. Fortunately, his bloodline was consistent, and his descendants faithfully inherited his will to unify China. However, the ruling of both his son and grandson were momentary and less prominent in history record. The period of their reign altogether was no more than 4 years. In comparison to know the ruling of these two kings, you may find it more fascinating to know more about their life, especially the king of Qingzhong Xiangwang, the grandson of King Qingzhao Xiangwang. As a humble son, he had no birthright to claim the throne, and he thus was sent to Handan of State Zhao as a hostage. Yet, with the help of Lu Buwei, a famous merchant, he managed to escape with Handan and was surprisingly adopted by the wife of his father as a legitimate heir and eventually become a king. He was the father of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. This part of history was a legendary story, We may discuss this in the future. In 247 BC, the king of Qin, Zhongxiang Wang, deceased because of natural cause after 3 years ruling. Then the first emperor took the throne when he was only a 13 years old adolescent. Royal conflict had been inevitably occurred among his mother, half-brother, and close people. Yet, with the assistance of the loyal and competent subjects, as well as his own determination, he gradually controlled the power and began to plan strategically to unify China. That was the year 238 BC. Therefore, we may conclude that though there was some political turbulence and instability in the last decades before the unification, the power transition was relatively smooth. And eventually, with a great leader, Qin Shi Huang seized power in long term. A stable and vigorous kingship would consolidate the basis for the state of Qin to unify China. But this is not enough to conquer the 6 states and establish a highly centralized empire. Desperate disease must have desperate remedies. To realize peace, you have to resort to violence in turbulent era. Yet, it would be quite a challenge for state of Qin short term after the Battle of Handan. As we discussed previously, the state of Qin may lost 250,000 to 300,000 men in the Battle of Changping. Whereas they took a heavy casualty of around 200,000 soldiers in the subsequent Battle of Handan. Essentially, this indicated that the state of Qin lost almost 450,000 to 500,000 fighting strength in merely 5 years. Consequently, the priority for them by then was to recover the population rapidly. But how did they do it?
As a matter of fact, the people of Qin had earned a good reputation as good farmers long before Shangyang's reform. Their proficient farming skill, combined with fertile soil in Guanzhong Plain, had made this area a granary fairly enough to feed people of Qin. Furthermore, with the deepening of Shangyang's reform, the balance of the policy became more favorable to the agriculture compared with commerce. Now, let's have a simple understanding of Shangyang's reform on agriculture. The first one was to abolish land nationalization while implementing land privatization. Its nature is to have the labor force free from slavery and inspire initiating. Similarly, except encouragement to do farming, the second principle focused more on guiding people to engage in agriculture instead of commerce. All these efforts were aimed to serve for the war, produce more grain, and feed more people. Two regulation may help you to know more about the influence exerted by the reform in detail. One regulation was about forced labor to transport grain. All men fulfill the service must own their own, while they could not hire anyone to replace them, according to the law. Why is this the case? The very reason is that plenty of labor force might be hired by the rich, so that the yield of the grain would be plummet in that case. One regulation was related to the price of grain. It regulated that the price of grain should be higher than its counterpart outside the border. Essentially, it jeopardized the interest of businessmen of the state of Qin and attempted to nurture its farming.
In addition, the state of Qin also increased its farming land by expansion. In 316 BC, 56 years before the Battle of Changping, in order to further strengthen its national power, the king Qin Zhaoxiang Wang's father found an excuse to invade the neighboring state, which was located in Sichuan Basin today. With the controlled fertile land in Sichuan Basin, the farming land of Qin had tremendously increased, which means they could produce more grain and feed more population. But the fighting strength as well as the grain reserve had been greatly depleted during the Battle of Changping and Handan in merely 5 to 6 years. It was crucial for the state of Qin to recover its strength. But by what means could it recover its power rapidly? The answer is irrigation project. The Dujiang Dam is approximately 15 miles northwest of city Chengdu. Today it irrigates almost 7,073 square kilometers, feeds more than 25 million people. This great work had been used for more than 2,000 years.
In 256 BC, 1 year after the Battle of Handan, under the due pressure of flood in Sichuan Basin and population recovery, the king Qin Zhaoxiang Wang assigned a master of engineering, Li Bing, to build this work, the Dujiang Dam. He had met plenty of hardships and danger, yet with his profession, talent, and endless effort of all common labor, the dam was finally completed in 251 BC. The nucleus of Dujiang Dam contains 3 parts: the fish mouth lead, flying sand weir and bottleneck channel. They work as an integral one to create balance between nature and human beings. While there was another gigantic irrigation project finished approximately 20 years after the construction of Dujiang Dam, the Zhenguo Canal. The Zhenguo Canal aimed to connect Jinghe River and the Luohe River, thus to further enrich the people in the Guanzhong Plain. While the building of the Zhenguo Canal was dramatic, as a master of water conservancy, Zhenguo was sent by his home country, the state of Han, to deplete Qin's human resource in the name of building an irrigation project. Soon, this plot was exposed. The first emperor was furious, yet Zhenguo's confession and sincerity deeply touched him. Zhenguo told him, "I was sent here for sabotage at the beginning, but what I learned reminded me that perhaps it's time to fulfill my aspiration. When the work is done, it will benefit the state of Qin for generations." Thereby, the first emperor had him continue to lead the project. He did not fail his duty. After about 10 years' effort, the canal was open. Its length was more than 92 miles, covered the farming land for more than 700 square kilometers. the Guanzhong Plain was more prosperous than ever before. With the completion of both the Dujiang Dam and Zhenguo Canal, the national power as well as population of Qin swiftly recovered within decades. The state was even more flourishing compared with that before the Battle of Changping. Qin's foundation of economy and population had been consolidated for the warfare. Though these two projects were originally built to serve the warfare, with the generation's restoration and improvement, they have benefited the local people for more than 2,200 years. They will continue to keep watch and help to feed the local people in foreseeable future. Their builders will not be forgotten. The success of the Zhenguo Canal may indicate that from the long run, for competition, a nation should focus more on its development rather than plot and scheme. Otherwise, their effort might be the cat's paws in Aesop's fables. Whereas most of states might not agree with this point of view, they abandon themselves in fighting, wantonness, and extravagancy. As we discussed previously, the national power of a nation considerably depends on its population. And how about other states except Qin? Though history record reveals that the earliest population census in China may date back to Xia dynasty, about 4,000 years ago. The map on the left is the earliest population distribution map in China, dates back to Han Dynasty, among the existing historical archives. This year was more than 200 years after the late period of warring states, since the economic center of gravity was always in northern China before Han Dynasty. And the latest course change in large scale to the Yellow River was in 11 AD. We can roughly use this map to induce the population distribution in the late period of warring states. Obviously, the Guanzhong Plain and the Sichuan Basin had a higher density of population compared with the neighboring area. They were the main source of Qin's population, while the majority of the population lived in Huabei alluvial plain by the Yellow River. Territory of 5 states interlocked with each other within this cramped area. For the states of Han, Wei, and Qi, though their land were relatively small, the density of the population were substantially high. By contrast, for states of Chu and Zhao, although the density of population were relatively low, their territory were vast. Consequently, there were 4 competent challengers on the arena for state of Qin: Qi, Chu, Zhao, Wei. As all the rulers of these states were mediocre or even worse, there were only 2 challengers left, Wei and Zhao. Why? Because Zhao had a top general Li Mu, and Wei had the Lord Xingling. Now let's take a look at the map to have an understanding of military conflict between Qin and other states in this period. After the defeat of Handan,
The Qing's force kept offensive against other states in the last few years of his reign of King Qin Zhaoxiang. As Qin urgently needed recovery, these campaigns were less prominent in scale compared with the previous ones. Therefore, they are more likely to be deterrence and consolidation rather than expansion. While within no more than 10 years after the Battle of Handan, the state of Qin launched another wave of attack in large scale. They took a large area of state Zhao, including 37 cities and towns. Even Jingyang was taken again. Nevertheless, they took a death blow of the united force under the leadership of Lord Xingling on the south bank of the Yellow River. They had to fall back to the Hanguguan mountain pass. They regained the Shandong area, lost again. Yet, only 3 years later, after the dismissal and death of Lord Xingling, Qin started a new wave of attack against the state Zhao and Wei. As a result, Wei lost more than 20 cities and towns, thus completely lost the strength to oppose Qin, while the state of Han lost 13 cities and towns and had become weaker. One fact you may find on the map is that both state Han and Wei had no strategic depth anymore after this expansion. Qin could attack their capitals within 1 day's march. No one could await his doom. In 241 BC, 5 states united to attack the state of Qin, while the main force confronted with the force of Qin at the Hanguguan mountain pass. Another troop started from the border of Qin and Zhao were near the city of Jingyang. They bypassed the Qin cities and took a long-range raid. They expected to disrupt Qin's deployment as a whole. Eventually, they got to the city of Zui, where they failed to fulfill their task. They lost the battle then. This was the last alliance for the 5 states. Then Qin began to strike the state of Zhao from 236 BC, and they pushed the border to the capital of Zhao within 3 years. It seemed that Zhao would follow the step of Han and Wei very soon. However, in 233 BC and 232 BC, Qin's attack met severe resistance of Zhao, led by the great general Li Mu. They were defeated in the battle of Yi'an and Fanwu, respectively. Unfortunately, Li Mu's fight back were only success on the tactical level. Essentially, nothing had changed for Zhao's passive position on the strategic level. From the change of the situation of warfare, we might conclude 2 key points. First, the national power of the 6 states were relatively weak. If it weren't the exceptional general like Lord Xingling and Li Mu, the unification of China may realize earlier. Second, on the other hand, although Qing's dominant power was apparent compared with other states, still, their strength would be difficult to tackle with when they were united, not to mention if they had great generals like Lord Xingling and Li Mu. Consequently, military force was necessary but shouldn't be the only strategy for Qin to unify China. They must take a more practical and flexible strategy. 11 years before the Battle of Changping, Fan Sui had offered the king, Qin Zhao Xiangwang, a profound suggestion. Make friends with the states doesn't border upon Qin's territory, while annex the land of the neighboring states. The state of Qin had been a faithful believer of this strategy from the very beginning. This might justify why Qin attacked the four states of Han, Chu, Zhao, Wei, regardless of their previous friendship and grudge. While they kept peace with distant states like Qi and Yan most of the time, unless they posed a huge threat. Sometimes they aligned themselves with those states that had been seriously crippled and make them its subjects. In 254 BC, Han and Wei subjected themselves to Qin, yet it doesn't mean that Qin would cease to annex their lands. What they did was but to break up the opponents. The previous map had already demonstrated how Qin further encroached their territory in next 20 years. In 237 BC, Qin even invited the king of Qi visit its capital, Xianyang, for peace as strategic deception. On the other hand, hostage was still an important measure to influence the movement of other states. For instance, the state of Wei and Yan sent their crown princes as hostage to Qin in 254 BC and 238 BC, respectively. While compared other hostages, the state Yan's prince would forge another legendary story. We will talk this in the future. However, all these were but the contests on the table. Those ones below the odds were lethal. The people of Qin were truly master of espionage. They were good at driving a wedge between enemies. They had performed a splendid show in the Battle of Changping. They successfully had the king of Zhao replace Lian Po with the Zhao Kuo, and eventually led to the disastrous failure of Changping. Similar end was equally shared by the Lord of Xingling. When he returned to State Wei with both glory and regard after the Battle of Hewai, he was dreaded by many, especially his brother King Wei and the people of Qin. Thus, the people of Qin bribed the people of the North close to King Wei and spread rumors within the court of Wei. Some cliches like the Lord of Xingling would replace King Wei with himself. Such issue would be a test for political environment of the nation, and obviously, the King of Wei bought such a scheme. Finally, the Lord of Xingling stepped out history tragically. He wasn't the first one nor the last one fell into Qin's trap. Therefore, the 6 states were just walls removed of claws and teeth by them. The background of political, economic, and external environment was considerably favorable to Qin's unification. Yet, the first emperor knew talents were desperately required for such an unprecedented event of unification. As a matter of fact, as it lacked the relevant talents in politics and diplomacy, the state of Qin had a tradition to respect and introduce talent from other states, especially since Shangyang's reform. The majority of the prime minister of Qin after Shangyang's reform were from other states. The famous ones we mentioned before as Shangyang, Fan Sui, and Lü Buwei. None of them were citizens of Qin.
Whereas the next one we will introduce was not the native Qin either. Technically speaking, he was the first prime minister as well as the last one in Qin dynasty. Now, let's begin with Li Si and others to have a brief understanding of the first emperor's talent team. Li Si came from the state of Chu. He was an excellent student of Xunzi. Following his mentor, he learned the legislative thought and had it applied to practice. It was with his assistance and visionary guidance the first emperor built a highly centralized government. To sum up, he was the designer and architecture of Qing's empire. Then we come to the general Wang Jie. As one of the top generals in Warring States period, Wang Jie was not only famous for his exceptional commanding leadership, but also his understanding of politics. He was also the mentor of the first emperor. As the close friend of the first emperor, Meng Tian was also an outstanding commander. However, he might be more reputed for his versatility and a tragic destiny. Meng Tian was authorized to see to the construction of the Great Wall. He was both the guardian of the north border of China as well as the crown prince of Fusu. Wei Liaozi was from State Wei either. As the top strategist in that era, Wei Liaozi offered quite a few wise suggestions to help to defeat other 6 states. Then it comes to Yao Gu. Yao Gu was a genius diplomat with a humble beginning. His gift failed to be valued by the state of Wei. Then he came to state of Qin and was soon to be promoted by the first emperor. There were 4 young generals under the command of Wang Jie: Wang Deng, Li Xin, Zhang Han, and Zhao Tuo. They were all important players in the near future. The final one we talk about was Dun Ruo. He came from State Wei as well. He would play a significant role in the war of unification of China. We will introduce only part of the talent team due to the time limit. Yet, it was with the support of the team the first emperor could eventually achieve his goal. Now, it's time to make a conclusion for this session. Though the state of Qin suffered great loss in the Battle of Changping and Handan, they swiftly adjusted the strategy and policies. They recovered strength within a very short time, yet it full of ups and downs for them to bounce back. They were defeated several times. Eventually, they used strategies to speed up the enemy and gain advantages. Rome was not built in one day. So was Qing's dominant position against 6 states. After 5 generations of effort, when the power came to the first emperor, all conditions for unification were met. It seems that I already heard the drumbeat of war. This session about Qing's preparation for unification is done here. In next session, we shall go over the battle of Qing's conquest of Zhao. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.